Hi, I'm Bob Acton, the host of the Color in Ceramics podcast. Before we dive in, I want to tell you about something I've been working on behind the scenes that I think a lot of you are going to find genuinely useful. And I call it the Creative Momentum Lab, which really will also make this show possible. I'll tell you more about it soon, but essentially, the Creative Momentum Lab is an online learning platform I created for working artists. It's built around the real stuff that gets in the way of your work. Too many ideas pulling you in different directions, self doubt, burnout, and so on. If any of that sounds familiar, there are courses inside designed to help you work through it and get back to what matters. You'll be able to find out about it soon at creativemomentumlab.com. Now let's get into today's conversation. Today on the Color in Ceramics podcast, I'm really pleased to welcome Sarah Pike to the podcast. Sarah is one of Canada's top ceramic artists, known for her beautiful slab-built pottery that feels both grounded and full of movement. She works from her home studio in Fernie, British Columbia, and her pieces are deeply influenced by the mountain landscape around her, as well as antique tinware, textured metal, and the character of old handmade objects. Sarah studied ceramics at ACAD in Calgary and also at the University of Colorado and the University of Minnesota. She's built a remarkable body of work, and I'm so happy to have her here today. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today on the Color and Ceramics podcast. We are very pumped about having you here, partly because I've met you and taken one of your courses a few years ago, but probably mostly we just love your work. And so it's awesome to have you here to talk about you and your journey and your work.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's so lovely to hear. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, and I wondered if you could start us off a little bit by telling us a little bit about you and your work. So take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about your journey into clay.
Well, the beginning is quite a long time ago because I started working in clay as a child, as a lot of people do, especially in Calgary with North Mount Pleasant and Wildflower Art Centers, and actually more art centers now even. What a wonderful opportunity for children to get their hands in clay from a young age. So that for me was in the greater Vancouver area at Richmond Art Center. And we lived there till I was 10, and clay was definitely my favorite class. Then we moved to Salt Spring Island, and I was maybe 13 years old working at a restaurant bussing tables. And a friend of my parents, who was a potter on the island, he knew how much I loved clay and missed clay because there wasn't actually an art center on the island at the time. And he had seen a kiln for sale in Vancouver, I think at Green Barn, honestly. It was like a used kiln, and mentioned it to me, and I bought it. So I bought my first kiln at 13. So that's what I mean. I started a long time ago. I made slab-built and coil-built pots, lamps, little sculptures, and I guess I just haven't stopped. I've just been doing it ever since. There was a little bit in high school. I didn't do so much. We moved around a bit. So in high school, not so much. Went to art school thinking I was going to be probably a drawing major. And of course, took the ceramic elective, and it's like, oh yeah, this is my home.
This is me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And you went to school here in Calgary, didn't you?
I
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yes. And funnily enough, I was just telling this story the other day. In my first year, at AU Arts, first year is kind of general studies. You do a bit of everything. And of course, you take a few electives, and one of those electives was a ceramics one. But the strange thing was that my first semester drawing teacher was John Chalk. And Calgary folks know of John Chalk. He's a legendary ceramic artist from Calgary, well, from England originally, but he was teaching me drawing. And at the time, I was really into like hyper realism drawing and painting. That was kind of what I went to school. My portfolio was focused on that. And so he took me to the design program and said, I think this would be a good fit for you if you don't know what you're going to do next year. And when I went over there, I was like, I can see why he thought that would be a good fit for me, considering the type of drawing and whatnot I was doing at the time. But I felt like it wasn't me. So I feel like I'm always kind of walking that like narrow path between being very precise and sort of design focused and getting kind of loose and I guess just feeling a little bit more free. So trying to find that path in between. So I think it's kind of interesting that there was this pull towards this design side, but ceramics is what ended up being my major.
I'm thinking about your work, and of course, people can't see your work here. Hopefully, they'll go to your website and Instagram pages and whatnot to see your work. But as I'm pulling up an image of your work in my mind, I see you using a lot of stamps because I know you use stamps to impress images on the clay. And so there's a lot of precision with that because the stamps are precise. And yet, when they're pushed into the clay, we get that kind of organic, abstracty oozing, I guess is maybe the word, of the clay around the stamp. Is that kind of how you've managed to match that kind of abstract part of you along with the precision part of you?
I think it's a part of it. And I think there's constantly moments in the process where you're making these choices and whether they're intuitive or cerebral. But I think that the stamping by hand also instead of maybe going to one of some sort of digital system of printing the texture or whatnot also helps me stay in that looser zone or where I want to be in the zone, I suppose. Like there's nothing wrong with either side, but trying to find my path in it. And so that yeah, definitely the squishy part of clay and working with the clay while it's really soft so that the clay always has a bit of its own voice, it's bringing that softness into it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, could you describe your work rather than me describing your work? Could you describe your work and tell the audience about what it's about, what it looks like, what it means to you?
Okay, maybe I'll start with the process. So the
Sure.
work is slab built. So I roll out by hand, actually, also not using a slab roller. I roll out slabs on my table and I texture those slabs with hand carved texture tools and then form those slabs into functional objects, various functional objects. And often the inspiration for the texture tools, whether direct or abstract, come from nature. Whether, I live in the mountains here in Fernie, BC, so I do a lot of hiking, mountain biking, and winter activities as well out in the woods, but also an avid gardener. So right outside my studio's at home, right outside the studio is a garden, and it's full of weeds, as a lot of gardens are, but it's also full of flowers and vegetables and ornamental grasses and shrubs. All the pretty layers of texture are right outside my window, so that often comes to play in terms of inspiration for the texture tools. Um, I want to. I'm sorry. Can you hear that dog barking? Should I? I've got
Well,
my.
it's all good. It's all good. It's
Um,
part of nature.
yeah, the neighbor's dog wants to be on the podcast. Um, and I guess going back to that being rigid versus soft or loose in my work, I could take the slabs and really let them set up to a hard, like imagine building something like plywood, like cutting bevels, sticking it together while it's really hard. And it would maybe have more of that design sort of, precise look to it. But the choice of working with really soft slabs, I think this sort of pulls me back into I don't know, maybe is it the essence of the clay, like the softness of the clay? I want that to come through in the piece. I don't want it to look very tight and rigid. So yeah, somewhere in between there.
Yeah, so it's less formal. It maybe is a word I might come up with. Yeah, with
True.
yeah.
I know, like I'm looking at my wall of mugs right now, and I'm thinking, I guess people could see it very formal in terms, wherever they are on that spectrum that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like even though the stamps are stamped by hand and all the stamps are made by hand, they could start to look, I guess, very precise. So, hoping for a little bit of looseness, a little bit of imperfection in in that.
Yeah,
If that
yeah. And of course, we all know that art doesn't end when the piece is made. It involves the person using or feeling or looking at the piece, right? And so I suppose people would impose their own perspective on that and see that more formal look or less or a more loose look too, depending on their own perspective.
Right. Yeah. And I guess the other part of it, in terms of talking about my work, like I love the patterns that emerge through the work, but I also am so interested in the tactility of it, of the texture. So it's a pattern that you can feel as well. So going to back to your point of the work taking on its own sort of meaning for the people using it. I love the idea of, pottery being art that you are meant to touch and hold so that you can, whether it is a conscious decision to explore the texture with your fingers or just while you're contemplating other things, your hands are maybe exploring the surface. I love that. Right. And it's just, and a mug especially too, like the text, a lot of my textures go right to the rim. So how does that feeling on your lips? It just kind of brings maybe an awareness to the moment of using it too.
Mhm. So it's not just visual.
No.
There's a lot of textural quality to it that gets into the visceral quality of things for you.
Yes. 100.
Yes, yeah, that is cool. Now, your work is around nature. And when you talked about being out in the bush, I love being out in the bush too. And I'm a big gardener as well. So I know exactly what you mean about shapes and forms and colors and all those kinds of things. Well, how do you recognize a direction or an idea that's going to sort of pull you in or that it's worth committing to? Because out in the bush or in the garden, there's a million different things you could pay attention to. How do you get into something?
That's a great question. And I guess if you could see my stamp collection, you would know that I'm doing a little bit of maybe all of it because I have hundreds of stamps and not all of them work. But I guess, you get an idea, maybe it is like looking out the window right now, even with the snow, but I can see last year's ornamental grasses with willow behind and a stack of twigs and dead tomato branches behind that, and just thinking about all those layers of texture and what those look like and how I could create different layers by creating different stamps that fit into each other that would talk about that. So that's kind of direct in terms of looking outside, seeing that landscape right now, but also I don't want it to necessarily, like sometimes it is, but necessarily be like, oh, that's clearly a red osier dogwood on that stamp, but just like the structure of it maybe is talking about those layers of looking in the garden. But a few years ago, for sure, I was more into, okay, I love the way snow sits on winter trees, like just really outlining the especially gnarly ones, like we have hawthorns growing along the river and they sort of reach out in this very gnarly reaching way out over the river, and then the snow sits on them and really sort of accentuates it, like almost like a silver lining on every branch, right? And so my phone's full of images of that too, so sometimes it is a little bit more, you know direct in terms of reference. But I mean, I'm out there almost every day because I have a dog, so it's constantly, I think, in my mind how to bring certain parts of it, and through trial and error, also realizing that when I've done this sort of shape before, it's in terms of stamps, it hasn't worked, it hasn't been successful. Is that something I want to keep pursuing? Maybe there's a way to make it work, or is it maybe this tangent over here that's exciting me and I'll follow that one. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Like it sounds like it's both an unconscious and a conscious process in the sense that when you're outside in the bush, you might be your attention might be captured by a particular branch or a form of something that's hard to put your finger on. But when you get back to the studio, then you really do have to think about it, to be thinking about, well, okay, how do I apply this to a surface or to the lip? Like this particular design would work here, but not here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And also thinking about the sort of outside shape of repeating stamps and what those outside shapes and how they repeat might be echoed in nature. So like I was talking about these layers, like, the closest layer might be the sage bush right outside the window kind of thing. This all started actually going to Medalta, and on my drive there from Fernie, you pass the Spitz farm. Do you know the Spitz farm? I don't know if everybody knows about Spitz farms, but that's where the sunflower seeds come from. So at the right time of summer, of course, it's just fields of beautiful sunflowers, and they're all right? They turn to face the sun as the sun moves through the sky. So if you're standing in the right position, you can see all of their faces in this beautiful layered way, moving into the distance. So starting with larger ones maybe in the front, but just like that's a perfect scallop shape, right? So it's like the first one, and then behind it, each of these little flowers are these little scallops. So creating that, I guess, landscape of that flower maybe was the beginning of creating these layers of different textures that might be just in the garden. So different stamps that would fit together, maybe the scallop shape, but how it could be different parts of the garden or woods or, the river, whatever it is, abstract or not, but thinking about how the shape of the stamp and its repetition could imitate something in nature.
What a great way to have an artist explain their internal process, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm driving down the road and I see this field of sunflowers, right? I mean, really,
Yeah.
that is perfect. That's great. Hey, let's talk about color a little bit because um, you have a certain color palette that you work with. How do you think about, or what is it, and how do you think about color with respect to texture and shape and the things we've been talking about so far?
So I guess early on, I was working with a white clay body, and I had just come from being able to fire atmospheric kilns in Calgary at North Mount Pleasant, and I always loved the raw areas, the richness of atmospheric, especially wood or soda or salt, where you have that flashing coming in the raw areas of the clay. So then when I first came to Fernie and I wasn't firing that way anymore, I was disappointed by, these large areas like on the bottom of a pot or something that was raw, and it just like the white clay compared to how I had been firing just felt very anemic. So that was when I first switched to using red clay. So loving the richness of the red clay. And then when texturing the red clay, I want to accentuate that texture. I want the glaze to really show off that texture. So the glaze itself is designed to pool in recesses and break over the red, raised bits so that it's almost like looks like, somewhat like a drawing, I guess, the dark clay coming through. So if it's a dark clay coming through a glaze, I need it to be a somewhat light colored glaze to show it off. And then back to my point of loving being actually pretty obsessed with trees with snow in in winter, when you use a glaze that sort of moves a little bit, it has a bit of melt to it, it tends to pool on the top of those branches, right? So it's melting over the surface of the raised branch and then pooling on the top. So it kind of looks like those hawthorns reaching over the river. So that's how I started with the white, and the satin texture of it also just really appeals to me. Kind of goes back to some of the surfaces you would get in a soda kiln, like some of that like buttery, surface, satiny surface. A shiny glaze sort of works, but the shine can take away from the texture because the reflection kind of distracts your eye from the texture. So, and then I would say probably nature, just like earthy colors. So the white, I call it bone. When we lived on a farm before we lived here, I was always on my walks with the dog picking up antlers and skulls and bones and bringing them home. I love that bleached bone look. So that would be one thing, but also coming here where the snow generally stays the whole winter. Snow is just so beautiful and magical. So thinking about snow, earth, and bones to start with. And then yeah, the yellowish glaze that I also use is it's very earthy. So earthy colors. The fall in Fernie is incredible with all the large trees in the valley, and they are very much that sort of ochre orange color.
Yeah, oh, it's beautiful work, and I notice with your work you don't have a lot of bright colors like reds and blues. You've got that earthy look to it, which really appeals to me, I guess. But it also really fits with the what you're talking about in terms of breaking over that red clay to give you that design look.
Yeah, and it's what's funny about that, Bob, is that the garden is full of vibrant flowers, but I'm not putting that on my pot so much. Every now and then there'll be a little bit of color maybe, but it's the more earthy part of everything that I'm really
Hmm.
attracted to.
Yeah, that's very cool. Hey, what can tend to pull you away from your creative center, and how do you return to that?
Yeah, isn't that the question of for all artists? I was just thinking about this a couple of days ago and how precious that creative mind space is once you're in it, right? So I would say once I'm in it, really taking um, time to protect it, try not to allow for distractions, communicating with family or whatever, that it's like when I'm in this zone, you can't just come in here with all of your stress. I want to hear about that, of course, but not right now. Like this needs to be protected, and knowing what time of day and um, yeah, just really paying attention to what, for me, I guess, sort of facilitates being in that creative space and making boundaries probably of trying to protect it. But definitely nature, like going out, like we've already spoken about, getting out into the woods, it's is always, even if it's not direct, it's such a great reset to sort of get out of your head and breathe that beautiful fresh air, see everything, get the endorphins going, and then come back into the studio. I also find that a challenge, and I've talked about this before in other ways, the the setting up a challenge for myself if I am feeling very um I guess just not creative. If I force my hand, once I get going, the momentum keeps it going, if that makes sense. So, and it's on Instagram after my mom passed away, she was my best friend, one of my best friends. We were super close and she died very suddenly. So I was, of course, devastated and finding it really hard to get back into the studio to make things. I just couldn't get into that creative space. And I did go to a therapist and she made this recommendation of doing something every day, whether it was 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I was like, I can't even think how I would do that. And what in the studio could I do that would take 5 minutes? And I started thinking about it. I was like, well, maybe I can, I was already texturing pots, but I wasn't texturing them all over. And I hadn't really gone on a tangent for a while on that. So it's like, oh, maybe make a texture tool every day for 30 days. I'll use Instagram as an accountability tool and I'll post this new texture every day. And because of that, the first day I was like, I don't really feel like doing this. I'm carving.
Yes, yeah.
It's like I'm not feeling it. And then I was thinking, as I was doing it every day, I was thinking about my mom and I was thinking about growing up on Salt Spring, and we used to go to this point every Sunday, and there was again this gnarly Gary oak tree that reached out over the ocean. And I was like, I'm going to carve that up. I'm thinking about my mom and how we gardened together, and she taught me so much about gardening, and we shared that passion. And so it was a way for me to work through the grief, but also a way to get back into the studio. So having this challenge, even though I didn't want to do it at first, suddenly I was thinking about it more and more every day, like going to bed and thinking about what am I going to do tomorrow, And so I know it sounds a little weird to use social media, maybe it doesn't have to be that, but it did help with the accountability. It was the setting up a challenge and forcing my hand to some extent to just get it going. But once I was going, the juices were flowing. And I'm not saying that every day was easy. It was like some days I was 9 o'clock at night and I was still trying to figure out what the stamp or texture of that day was going to be. But other days it was like, oh my gosh, yesterday was this beautiful stepping stone into what I want to try today. And then you find those tangents and that can be so exciting. So I guess a challenge is
Mhm.
the short answer to your question.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's some great ideas there. But I guess if I sort of impose my thinking on what you just described, you have structure in your life, and that structure really helps you with that creative piece. Now, that structure could be closing the door to your studio and putting a stop, do not disturb sign out front, right? Or the structured rules you'll tell your family, don't call me between 9 and 12 or whatever your structure is. Um, or your structure could be imposing a rule for yourself around, I'm going to do one of these every day as a way to let my mom into my work a little bit, but I need to do this a little bit every day. Not a big thing, but a little thing every day. And that's a bit of structure, I think. And you used Instagram, as crazy as Instagram can be these days, as a way to help you with that structure, just to make sure that you do it.
Yeah, which is so funny because when I hear you saying that, I was like, no, 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 not structure. I don't like structure.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah,
tell me what to do, even if it's me. Don't tell me what to do.
yeah, yeah.
So, again, walking that path between structure and feeling loose and having the freedom to work in the studio at whatever time of day I want to, right? So, you're right. There's definitely an element of structure there, but also when the kids were younger and you have to get them to school at a certain time and get them to all their activities and get dinner in them, and it's like that routine, it would just drive me crazy. I resisted it with every part of my body. So it's really funny for me to hear you say that structure is what I need. But you're right.
Well, you imposed it on yourself. I mean, I
I
think
did.
that's the difference between somebody
Maybe.
else telling us what to do. Artists don't like that, and you doing it for yourself, right?
Yeah, that's so true. That's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
true.
yeah. Hey, has like you're a very senior person in the clay world. You have done great training. You do beautiful work. You're selling your work internationally. You're teaching a lot. Uh, and so I don't know if this would fit, but I wonder whether self-doubt has ever raised its head for you in your practice. And if it hasn't, that's cool. But I wonder if it has, how your relationship to it has changed over time.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I'm thinking about, yes, I am senior in this world to some extent, but I when I went to grad school, I ended up getting pregnant while I was there. So I ended up quitting grad school and we ended up running my husband's ranch while the kids were little for a number of years. I think 8 years. There was a pivot there where I wasn't making my own work. We were running the ranch, looking after cows, raising young children and homeschooling. And it was when we moved to Fernie 15 years ago that I started to make pottery again more full time and actually like saying this is one of the reasons we're moving to Fernie is to take away all of those other distractions and have at least maybe a year where I can focus on making pottery and see if it's a thing that's sustainable and something I can keep doing. And back to your question, at that moment, I had so much self-doubt, because part of the reason for coming here was that I was going to focus on making pots, but I hadn't done it very much in the past few years. It was this part of me that had felt like it was dying a little bit inside, but I wanted to. But here we are. I'm moving our family. We're changing our lives. And what if this is not, what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't do this? And honestly, the pots I made in that first year, and I talk about it being like ideas that percolate in your brain because you're not able to actually like bring them into fruition. They're just percolating. And maybe at first I thought percolating to turn into a beautiful coffee, but maybe percolating and then fermenting and turning into compost water or something. When I first got into the studio, I was making these terrible pots and it's like, oh my gosh, I have made a big mistake. I am not good enough to do this. And I don't think this is going to work kind of thing, but somehow ended up pushing through it, maybe because I had already made this commitment by moving here and doing this. So kept making lots of weird pots until I started making things that I felt good about or somewhat but it is a roller coaster for your brain because, you're like those first pots that I started to feel good about. You send them out into the world and maybe apply to shows and maybe you get some rejections and boom, you're back in that mindset of, no, you're right, they're not good enough. And why did you think this was a good idea, Sarah, to, start this process? So I definitely know what that feels like. And even I'm not sure how many years. I guess it was around when my mom passed away when I really started looking more at tessellation, so covering the whole pot in texture. I had done it a little bit before, but this was like a real focus. And I think I had been known for a certain style of work before that, and so it felt like a shift. And I wondered if people were going to like it. And I remember doubting myself when I first came out with that new line of work. So it's definitely been there. And I would say I'm always kind of happy to hear about people having imposter syndrome who are, maybe famous celebrities or musicians or whatever it is, because it just proves that everybody feels it at some point, right? Or
Yeah.
most, maybe unless you're like a sociopath or something. I feel like at some point you're going to be like, I don't belong here. They're going to figure it out that I don't belong here and they're going to kick me out or whatever, or they're going to judge me. Um, I still have moments of that, but I guess I've come to through maybe experience and being here long enough, I've come to realize that there's a positive, a silver lining to that feeling because it makes you do your best, right? I don't want to ever enter a situation and be like, whatever, this is going to be fine. I don't need to work at this. I want every single thing to be my best, I think. And for instance, I have a broken arm and I was just in Ontario teaching some workshops there. And before I went, I spent a week making pots with just my left hand, which is my non-dominant hand, because I want to show up there and be my best. I want them to be happy that they invited me, and I want to feel good about the work I do. So I think that the imposter syndrome has a positive bend if you can see it through that light.
Mm. So, I'm one. I see this part of you, this part where the self-doubt rises up in you, and we talk about how that's kind of a normal thing. And some people freeze with that, right? They then can't move forward.
Mhm.
And then there's this other part of you that really wants to produce excellent work. It's the best you can do. Can you talk a little bit about, or if you're aware of it, what's the bridge between that moment where you're feeling insecure and then you're able to jump over to your confidence part that says, I got to do my best here. I'm not giving up. I'm not doing the it's good enough story.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what that is. That's interesting. So I remember early days before grad school and whatnot, working for the city of Calgary and in different art centers. And I remember this one, I think maybe it was the first adult clay class that I taught. And I was, 22, I was barely an adult, but I think it was around that time. And I was so nervous to go in there and be like this, basically feeling like a kid and telling all of these adults how to make pots. And I doubted myself so much. And I felt like I didn't have the voice. And I remember it was like an evening class. I would not even be able to handle. I'd be feeling so much stress. I wouldn't even be able to handle it. Somehow though, I would go and I would take a nap and I would like sleep away the feeling and then wake up and be like, oh my God, I gotta go do it. And I would go. And I guess I think what it is that I don't know if I ever froze. So I'm lucky that I didn't have that reaction to it. I definitely felt nervous. I definitely felt like I didn't have a thing to share, but I had been employed to do it and I worked through it. And I think maybe the practice of showing up with that feeling of being the imposter or not good enough times and proving myself wrong, by doing the best I can has over time shown me that even when you feel that way, if you do your best, you did your best, there's and hopefully I think a part of it also, Bob, is maybe some form of authenticity. Like I want to connect with people, so if I can connect, then that's success to me. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
person after a talk comes up to me and was like, what you said about blah, blah, blah really resonated with me. I'm like, yeah, that I feel that way too, and we just
Yeah.
connected and that's amazing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hear you practicing being confident. I know that may sound kind of
Yeah.
goofy, but when I think about art or clay, or we often want to take a class to learn the technique. So I'll take a class to learn a slab technique, or I'll learn how to make stamps, or how to throw, or whatever. I mean, so we focus on that, but really this part we're talking about now is in addition to learning all those techniques around the clay technical components, but it's around how do I practice being confident? And so your strategy was to have a quick nap and get out of that thinking, and then get back in there and just do it. And it's that practicing of breaking through that to confidence on the other side that really worked.
Yeah. And I remember hearing RuPaul talk about being an introvert who masquerades as an extrovert. And that really struck me because I that makes sense to me. I am definitely on the introvert side of things. I'm happy to spend hours alone in my studio, but I also still want to connect with people. But I think that a part of that practice is almost like the fake it till you make it kind of thing, where it's like I am going to masquerade as being confident until I feel confident a little bit. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
It's like,
for sure.
yeah, it's like figuring out how to be that person though that still feels authentic. It's tricky for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's excellent. Hey, I've got one quick question for you. And
Yep.
this is, what would you want to say to other makers who are trying to find their way creatively? You got any advice for people on that theme?
So are you talking about like the voice thing or how to maybe commit to a life of being a maker? Like what exactly are
Well,
anything?
I'm just, often I'll ask people what advice do they have for someone who's new to the field. And so, not somebody who's really super experienced and practicing, but somebody who's trying to find themselves in the world of clay. Have you got any advice for them?
I guess maybe two things. One would be when we first moved to Fernie, you're as a potter, because you need so much equipment, you're always trying to find a space that works. And sometimes it might be a corner in your basement or a closet, or, I've worked in barns and whatnot, but community studios, all these things. So you can make the work. And then carving that space in the basement initially was just like, okay, now I have a space. This is me. I'm doing this thing. But then I took out a loan and built the space in that I'm in right now. And again, that like, am I worthy of this? Is this my life? What is the plan B? If it doesn't work out, could this be like in a rental space or something like that? But making that commitment to myself, whether it was moving to Fernie to pursue the pottery, even though it was scary, or whether it was to build an actual legit space, it proved to me that I was committed, I guess. And it
Mm-hmm.
proved to me that this was the life that I wanted. And it forced me to like get out of that zone of can I do this? Can I do it? Like I couldn't think that way anymore because I was like, I have bills to pay now and I'm going to do this thing,
Yeah, yeah.
So that would maybe be a part of it. And then I think in terms of maybe finding your creative voice, that's such a nebulous
Mhm.
thing. And, you look around at art shows and stuff, and you can see all of these beautiful voices there, right? All these,
Yeah.
whether you're, working in leather or ceramics or jewelry, or whatever, it's like, oh, clearly there's something here that is this person. And, but it is so nebulous to actually get from, I don't know what it is to this is me. And I feel like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of trial and error. And I would say that probably the biggest thing is to try and still that little voice in your mind that makes you afraid of failure. And I talk about trial and error as being an expression. It's not trial and success, it's trial and error. So we try and we try and we fail and we fail. and eventually we find something that works, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that like the whole Martha Stewart do it yourself culture makes us feel like, oh, we can just take this and boom, I've made this beautiful thing and that's me, but it's like someone else's design. Like we just want this very direct path to having the thing be ours.
Hmm.
But it's going to be a process, and I think it's a hard process, but it's important to figure out the things, and a lot of those trials are based off of your interests for sure, right? It's
For
like, I
sure.
really like slab building, so I'm going to keep playing with this idea, or I really like texture. I'm going to keep playing until I come up with something that starts to work for me. But
Yeah.
I often quote this. We took some surfing lessons, not, I don't know, a few years ago, but I was watching some videos and there was a surf instructor and he said, if you're not falling when you're surfing, you're not trying. And I think that really applies to anything, right? It's like you can just continue on the status quo and not ever push yourself and just be happy with where you are. Or you could be like falling on some waves because you're trying something different and you're okay with the falling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with clay, at least in my experience, it's been that I will make something and then I might not like the entire piece, but I like a little piece of it, or I like a component of it, or I'm big into texture, so I like the texture of this, but I didn't like it because I applied it in the wrong way. But if you can pull little components out of your work as you're making those mistakes and then begin to add them together, that begins to uh, create your voice, so to speak.
Yes. And I think that's something I say to my students also is like, do like this piece, what if you're looking at it and you don't like it, but there's probably something in it that was working.
Mhm.
So similar to what you're saying, so what's working, what's not working, what has potential, even though it wasn't working, right?
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
take that as a stepping stone for the next piece. But asking those questions is just so important.
Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I think our audience will love listening to you and listening to your advice about your journey in clay. And I really encourage people to go and check out your work and begin to take some of your classes because you're a great instructor, and so that would be fun for people to do.
Thanks so much, Bob. It was a pleasure. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed hanging out with you for the past 45 minutes or whatever. And we'll see you down the clay path somewhere in Calgary, maybe.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Take care.
One last thing before I let you go. Something I've been working on called the Creative Momentum Lab is almost ready, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you properly. It's for working artists who want to clear away what's getting in the way of their best work. But more details are going to come in the next episode. Check out creativemomentumlab.com. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.